Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to welcome you here in the House of the European Union in Vienna to this summit on energy security. It is a particular pleasure for me to welcome you all here in the room who are physically present. This is one of our first physical meetings since the end of the COVID pandemic, and I'm particularly pleased to welcome many viewers on the screen who are here available with us online to discuss and listen to our discussions on energy security. In the room, we have a particular welcome guest, that is Wolfgang Schüssel, the former Chancellor, who I want to welcome wholeheartedly and want to offer a round of applause for the former Chancellor of Austria. It's an honor to have you with us, Mr. Schüssel. I'm also very happy to welcome my great colleague and from the European Commission, Mechthild Wörsdorfer, who is Deputy Director General of the Energy DG of the European Commission and will join us later on the podium. Welcome, Mechthild. And of course, the President of United Europe, Günther Oettinger, is with us, one of the initiators of tonight's debate. He is not only the President of United Europe, but as you know, was also a long-serving member of the European Commission. He was in charge of everything modern in the Commission. First energy. He started with energy when most of us didn't know what the merit order principle was. He invented it. He was Commissioner for Digital. He was Commissioner for the budget, so all the money that we are spending today as European Union, he organized this during his mandate. And before that, he was probably even more important, Prime Minister of Baden-Württemberg, one of the wealthiest regions in Germany, and today a good example of how you can combine sustainability and industrial production. Welcome, Günther Oettinger. And ladies and gentlemen, it's also a pleasure for me to welcome the President of the Senat der Wirtschaft Austria, Hans Harrer. Hans, it's a great pleasure to see you again, and thanks for initiating this together with us. Ladies and gentlemen, energy could not be more topical in these days, and I wanted to outline to you as the representative of the European Commission in Austria, what are our European Union priorities in the current crisis. And I would say, if I simplify what we're doing as European Union in these critical days, that some call a Zeitenwende, I would say we have two priorities. Number one is a geopolitical priority. We want to help, as European Union, Ukraine to win the war. We want to help Ukraine to do, and we do for that whatever it takes, as President Ursula von der Leyen recently formulated that, because we believe that there is no other possible outcome of this conflict started by Russia by an unprecedented war of aggression. We believe that never again must be allowed that on our continent borders are moved by force, because if this happens, then our continent would be a bloodshed. Remember, on all the borders on our continent where there were 100, 200, 300 years ago. Now, this is not a small detail, ladies and gentlemen. That is the essence of peace on our continent. We also believe that never again must on our continent the law of the stronger replace the strength of the rule of law. The rule of law is currently challenged. The international rule of law, the United Nations Charter, the Helsinki Charter, things that have served us even during the times of the Cold War, they are put into pieces by Putin's aggression, and we do everything to not let this stand. We also believe that never again must we make the mistake, and many also here in the room were part of that, I would say out of good intentions, not to counter aggression on our continent, not to counter the illegal annexation of Crimea, the war in Georgia, because we have learned one thing over the last weeks and months, that if you don't counter aggression, then the appetite of Putin will not become smaller, but bigger. So this is our most important priority, to end the war, to help Ukraine to win the war, and not to allow Putin to get away with moving borders by force. I am glad that all 27 EU member states stand until they united behind that. Sometimes in the public debate this is overlooked. Yes, we may discuss about this or that detail, but on this matter of principle, we are all united, and I'm particularly grateful, as we are here in Austria, to the very strong support of the Austrian government, from the Chancellor to the President of the Federal Republic, to the Foreign Minister, to the Minister for European Affairs, who all repeat this mantra of the European Union every day. That's very important, because it's not easy to explain every day when we are bordering a recession, when we have high inflation, when people don't understand that they are the victims of a conflict started by Putin. But it's very good that all 27 countries and many of our allies in the world stand together with us. If you look what happened in the United Nations General Assembly when we condemned the annexation of the 4 so-called rebellious republics in East Ukraine, I think the whole world was with us. The whole world. I sometimes hear not everybody was with us. Well, that's Syria, North Korea, and 2 or 3 others, but everybody else was with us, because this is something that nobody in the world is condoning, and nobody has recognized this move of annexation. The second priority in this current crisis is, of course, to secure the energy supply. And not only as a matter of energy policy, because we need to do that if we don't want to allow Putin to blackmail us, to divide us in the current situation. If we don't want him to continue to manipulate, to weaponize, or even to sabotage gas supplies, as he has done, as we fear recently in the Baltic Sea. So here we Europeans have a more complicated task, because the energy market, and we will discuss this in detail in the course of this afternoon, is not an easy market. It's a complex market. It's a market with many, many actors. So some people say it's as easy to solve this as the COVID-19 crisis. We just buy it all together and then we solve it all together. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to hear today that it was so easy during the COVID-19 crisis. That was not the feeling at the time. Everybody said it was very difficult and it was complex, but indeed it was easier to buy together a vaccine that wasn't yet invented. Now we are here in a market that exists for years, for decades, that has been liberalized very successfully, and where we have to be very careful that by pushing one string or pulling one string, we don't do something what at the end will be to the detriment of our consumers, our companies, and our citizens. So the European Union has focused initially on 5 main steps to do in this current energy crisis caused by the war of Russia. Number 1 was to fill the gas storage in Europe. This sounds now today self-evident. I think when we started this in February, March, it was not self-evident at all, because there were no rules on gas storage. We had some rules on oil reserves from the oil crisis, but nothing on gas, because it was an open liberal market where there was never a problem. We agreed on a regulation to do that, so it was done by means of European Union law, a solidarity regulation. And I remember when we said we want by winter to have our gas storage filled, everybody said, well, that's a nice try, you will never make it. You will never get the gas. And if we look today on the 3rd of November 2022 in our gas storage, we see that 95% of the gas storage in the European Union is filled. In Germany, it's even almost 99%. In Austria, which has the largest, or one of the largest gas storage in Europe, it's at 93%. And even the very complicatedly located storage in Haidach, that the Austrians here know, which is it's on Austrian territory, but it serves mainly southern Germany, and it was until recently not even connected to the Austrian energy grid, is now filled at 93%, even though Gazprom had emptied it almost completely at the beginning of the year. So we have prepared for the winter, and I would say today we can say safely that this winter, in particular if the temperatures remain as they are, we will not face reduction of supply or even management by government regulators if we continue to save and to be solidarious beyond borders. So this has worked for this winter. The second thing, what we have done jointly in the European Union, we have tried since March to substitute Russian gas supplies by supplies from more reliable sources. If you recall, the European Union was dependent in February 2022 by 41% on Russian gas. 41%, that's the average of the whole European Union. Very different situations nationally. We have, for example, the Baltic states who have already eliminated their dependency on Russian gas some time ago, but we have also countries like the Central and Eastern European countries who were almost 100% dependent, Austria 80% dependent in February. So the European Union on average 41% dependent on Russian gas. This has been reduced until today to 7.5%. And you may now say, okay, that means all this gas is missing. No, that's not the case. This gas has been 100% substituted by additional supplies that the European Union, member states and the EU institutions organize together from more reliable sources. Norway has replaced Russia as the most important supplier of gas to the European Union, mainly by pipeline gas. The United States of America is, thanks to an early agreement between President Biden and Ursula von der Leyen, is supplying us with LNG gas. We have also new supplies from Algeria, Azerbaijan, and new promising memoranda of understanding and contracts with Israel and Egypt. All this together has basically compensated for the shortfall of Russian gas supplies, which is as such also something that many of us, I include myself, would not have excluded in February. The third thing that we have done together, and that's something that we were not used to this anymore since the 1970s, we have started to save energy again, which is as such not a bad thing, because we have, as energy was very cheap, we have used it in abundance, and I remember the discussions also here in Austria and in other member states about our energy efficiency directive, which Günther Oettinger in his mandate was partly responsible for. And most people say, you cannot implement that because it's not possible to save more energy. That was, in particular, the industry told us this in 2020 and 2021. When we see now what has happened, we agreed before the summer on reducing gas demand by 15% voluntarily, but with a mechanism in a regulation that if this doesn't work, it could be also made compulsory. And look at where we are today. In August and September, the first 2 months where this kicked in fully, we have reduced by even more than 15% gas consumption in the European Union, both by companies and by households. Of course, this is also mainly due to the high prices. The price signal has worked, but it has not led to massive closures of companies, even though admittedly some have problems. We have now added an additional energy saving obligation. 5% of the peak electricity should be saved. So this means the hours of the day when electricity is most expensive. We have now a mechanism to reduce the demand in all member states on a common European regulation. And also that is starting to have its effect and is lowering also prices, because if you increase on the one side supplies and reduce demand, our market seems to function is also reducing prices as we see that at the moment. The fourth thing that we have done jointly is roll out the renewable energy production in the European Union. We all know, or if you don't know it, we have learned it in this crisis, renewable energies, even though they have also a number of problems, because you have to discuss with town mayors and local authorities, and in some Länder of Austria, as Wolfgang Schüssel knows, this is more difficult than in others. But on general, these are energy supply that is not so dependent on anybody else. Once we have established wind power, solar power, or water power, we are relatively independent. That's why some call renewable energies today even freedom energies, because they make us less dependent from dictators and autocrats in the world. So what have we done as European Union? We launched a plan in March that all member states have supported called REPowerEU. And this REPowerEU plan is funding a lot of renewable energy production, is helping member states to organize state aid schemes, as we have one here in Austria. We have also invested out of our Next Generation EU post-corona crisis fund 1/3 into the ecological transition, that means into renewables. And I think most important, we're looking for the first time together as European Union at the speed of approval and authorization procedures. When the Commission published our REPowerEU documents in March, we had made a research and seen that in Europe to build A wind power plant takes you more than 9 years on average, the whole approval procedures, and solar power takes more than 4 years. That is definitely too long in these days, so our proposal is to bring this down to 6 to 12 months. And I'm glad to see that here in Austria there is now a new law on the Umweltverträglichkeitsprüfung going to the legislative procedure that is helping us to achieve exactly that. I know this means some discussions with mayors and some discussions with regional Landeshauptleute and others, but I believe this is the moment where we cannot shy away from that because this is cheap and affordable energy. And if you look out here from Vienna to Lower Austria, to the direction of Schwechat and to the Burgenland. I see some from the Burgenland here in the room. You see this can be done very successfully. The Burgenland is a net exporter of energy for most parts of the year. Ladies and gentlemen, and the fifth part, which is particularly important in this crisis, because Putin tries to divide us. He tries to divide our societies and tries to agitate, notably the socially weaker, against the establishment, as it is sometimes called on the propaganda channels. It's very important that together we protect the vulnerable households and vulnerable companies. And it's interesting to see the enormous amount of money all member states of the European Union at the moment spend on this. Yes, I'm also worried after the corona crisis, we have to do this a second time. But if all member states do this together in a coordinated effort, then I think, and in a solidarious effort, then I believe it is worth doing that because we need to make sure that some people are not simply left behind, that companies have to close or that citizens cannot pay their bills. Again, here Austria was one of the first countries who had a so-called anti-inflation and climate bonus sent to all households. I know in Austria everybody is always critical of the government, and I think you're right, this is a democracy, you should do that. But as somebody who lives in Austria since 3 years, that it is possible to send to 8.7 million people basically a check of 500 euro in a period of 5 to 6 weeks, which arrives almost at everybody. Some people had to queue up for 10 minutes in the post office, but I think that's for 500 euros okay, is a remarkable logistical effort that I'm not sure that all countries in the European Union would be able to do that. So my congratulations to the finance minister and the minister for climate who did this together, and I think showed that we can deliver fast in such a crisis when this is needed. Also, the electricity bill break in Austria was one of the first built on the European Commission's toolbox, and I think it's also something that shows you can cap the price for electricity consumption at a certain level, but you have to leave also some part to the normal market mechanism to not to take away the incentive for savings. Ladies and gentlemen, all this had some effect. We are in the middle of the work. The winter supply is secured for this winter. The gas prices are going down remarkably. The wholesale prices were this summer, you remember, at 300 euro per megawatt hour. They are now this week at 50 euro per megawatt hour, and there were days last week and at the beginning of this week's hours where there were minus 16 euro per megawatt hour. Why is this? Because suddenly, as all storage is filled, there's no space anymore, and at the same time, the LNG tankers are coming and arriving in the harbors. So we have now, if you look in Spain, in front of the harbors, we have LNG tankers queuing up there, which is, I think, not something we would have expected a couple of months ago. That doesn't mean that the prices go down to the pre-crisis level, but they are only 1/6 of what they were summer, and this is some good news for the coming weeks and months. So we will not starve, we will not freeze this winter, so we will survive this together. I'm very convinced about that. But that's not a reason for complacency. So let me conclude with 3 initiatives that we believe are now very important, for which we are trying at the moment to bring all member states with us as European Commission. We need to think not only of this winter, but of the next winter and the winter afterwards. So the next 2 heating seasons, because we believe that we have to prepare for a conflict to last, and certainly not Putin or his successor to put on the gas pipelines again. We believe the times of fossil fuel from Russia in Europe are definitely over. So that's why we need to do 3 things, and the Commission has made proposals for that on the 18th of October. First of all, pooling. We need to do more joint purchasing of gas notably, even though it's more difficult, as I said initially, than it was on vaccines, because we have hundreds, partly thousands of companies who are buying, and we have not the member states buying, because we have a privatized, liberalized market. But there is one state task that we have identified where we need to work together. That's the filling up of the gas storage for next winter. That is very important, because what you see when suddenly everybody rushes to fill the gas storage, which is a legal obligation, the last 10 to 20% are particularly expensive. Then all member states and all companies are out there and they outbid each other. That is not very effective. That is driving up prices. That's why the Commission has proposed a legal tool to have joint purchasing for these around 15% that are required to fill the last 10 to 20% of our gas storage. So basically what we're doing is we are next to OPEC, that's why I can say it. OPEC is a cartel of the producers. We are forming or allowing now, or creating the framework, of course under good legal conditions, a purchasers cartel, a European gas purchasing consortium under rules that are now proposed by the Commission, and at the Energy Council we had a lot of support from the member states. So I believe we are moving in this complicated market to the joint purchasing of what is needed to fill up the last 15% of the gas storage for the next coming winters. The second thing, what we need to do, we need to continue the saving. If you want to get the prices down, we need also to reduce demand. So what we have started, I think we have not even fully started. At the moment, it's the price that forces us. We have to have more intelligent usage of energy. We have to use smart meters in many, many households. Günther Oettinger was promoting that already when he was Energy Commissioner. And everybody has to do their part, the industry, but also households. Here in this house, sometimes we have people in the audience who complain. They said 2 years ago it was much warmer here on the evenings when we had discussions here. And that is actually true. You have well spotted that. We have reduced in all buildings of the European Commission the temperature in winter to maximum 19 degrees. If anybody needs a pullover, you will get it. We believe 19 degrees is absolutely acceptable. And if all public buildings in the European Union do that, we would save the the gas consumption of the whole of Austria, which is not a small country, as we all know. So we will continue that, and we believe we need to do that. In the 1970s, there were suddenly, in Austria and other parts of Europe, energy-saving associations being created. People who gave advice to people when to save energy. And I think we all need to listen to that again. The Austrian government has a campaign for energy saving. I think we need to do much more in this order, because I think the best hour of energy is the one that is not used. And last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, you will forgive me to say that as somebody who works for the European Commission, we believe also that solidarity is extremely important in these days, because we have a connected internal market. We have a connected energy market. The worst what would happen in the current crisis if one member state were to go it alone. Sometimes there are these discussions. I was recently in the Montafon. The Montafon is in Vorarlberg for the non-Austrians. And there was a very prominent local politician who said, the electricity from the Montafon stays in the Montafon. This was not targeted as the neighbors or at Brussels, it was targeted at Vienna, which is for the Montafon even further away than the rest of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to be very careful with that. Our energy networks are connected across borders. Austria is the best example. The west of Austria that is supplying a lot of southern Germany, the east of Austria closely connected with its north, its east and its south. So it would be a huge mistake if we suddenly said what is in the Austrian storage is Austrian, what is in the German storage is German. I don't know what we do then for Slovenia that doesn't have storage, or how we would work across borders. So I'm very grateful that we see in this crisis something where in the Corona crisis it took us 2 or 3 weeks to get there. We don't have this Austria first, Germany first, France first mentality. And we have very quickly this idea to work together. The energy ministers meet every couple of days. The heads of state and government meet, and this word solidarity is not only a word, it's also continuously a legal obligation. I welcome Mr. Riley, our moderator, who made it from the train station. And ladies and gentlemen, solidarity means also that we have to share across borders, that we have to coordinate across borders, perhaps even to finance across borders. This is a part where we are working. Günther Oettinger, at the time when he was Energy Commissioner, had proposed a regulation, the so-called SOS regulation, that everybody knows today. At the time, only the experts knew that. That is meant to secure the European security of supply regulation that entered into force in 2017, which requires all member states to conclude solidarity agreements with their neighbors, to make sure that in case of disruption of supply, it is possible that gas or other energy is shared across borders, because pipelines shouldn't know borders. This was entering into force in 2017. Since then, there should be, if you count all member states of the European Union and their connections over the border, we should have more than 40 solidarity agreements. How many do we have? We have 6, ladies and gentlemen. Only 6 were concluded until today, some only very recently. So that's why the Commission has proposed a European Union solidarity default rule, that even countries who have not managed to conclude or finalize these agreements have a basic obligation of solidarity also in the coming years, because we believe without that our internal market will not function. Solidarity, ladies and gentlemen, there are 2 approaches to that. One of them is a Christian one, an altruistic one. I'm solidarious with the weaker, with the others. That worked for a long time in the European Union. Today, and I think those who follow that, I applaud them. Those who are not so altruistic and are more egoistic, I would encourage you to look again at the map of Europe. Look where the energy networks are. Look at our internal market. If our neighbors are unwell in this energy crisis, if Slovakia is unwell, well, who will buy the Austrian products? If Germany is unwell or Italy is unwell, how will our internal market function? I think that is the best argument for solidarity. If you are not convinced that it comes from the heart, then it should come from your brain, is another good argument to be solidarious in this crisis. As our moderator is now here, I'm very happy about it. I'm happy to pass the floor, ladies and gentlemen, to the main panel, to the speakers, and of course, first of all, to our 2 co-hosts, to Günther Oettinger and to Hans Harrer. And until that, I wish you a very, very nice evening, interesting discussion. Please speak up. That's also what we should do. Speak up, discuss controversially. Don't shy away from controversy. There's only one person at the moment on this planet who really shies away from controversy. That is Mr. Putin. We should be better than him. We should show him that we have good discussions, controversial discussions, and we come out of this evening and out of this crisis stronger than we were before. Thank you very much. Have a good evening and do these good discussions.
Dear Martin Selmayr, dear President Harrer, dear Chancellor Wolfgang Schüssel, dear Ambassador Woźnik, dear Moderator Riley, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to all of you here in the European House and elsewhere via digital technologies. And may I thank our co-hosts and co-organizers, Senat, der Wirtschaft, President Harrer and Martin Selmayr and his team for organizing, together with United Europe, this platform, this energy conference today. It was in 1950 when the European network was born. It was a mining union. Monet and Schuman, they had the idea to bring together 6 founding countries to be a team of solidarity for steel and for coal. So at the beginning, it was energy, and now we see we need a complete single market for energy. Energy union. And the terrible war of Putin brings us together more than ever, I am sure. We have to Europeanize energy policies. And we have to see where is added value. To work together, 27 member states, and via the Energy Charter Treaty, even more. Central and Eastern European neighbors, countries, the Western Balkans, and many others. Nearly the whole continent has to be an energy team, a member in this energy union. Maybe one exemption, nuclear. Technology need never come together. Nuclear, yes or no, or abstention. Let's be tolerant. mainly in Austria, or in Germany. What the Polish are doing is one dimension, what others are doing a second dimension. So we have to tolerate and to accept that nuclear is a different and not always accepted technology. But all other parts of an energy strategy should be Europeanized. Firstly, infrastructure. We did a lot via Connecting Europe facility, a European program for co-funding electricity infrastructure, gas infrastructure, LNG terminals, to bring together all member states and to can transport electricity and gas from west to east, from east to west, from north to south, from south to north. Take reverse flow. In 2014, 15, 16, we could help Ukraine via reverse flow gas from Austria via Slovakia to Ukraine, coming from LNG terminals from the Adriatic Sea. So infrastructure. And we have to do more, even more, to invest in supergrids, to bring together all regional markets, to complete our infrastructure as we have infrastructure for cars and trucks via highways, for trains via railway systems. So same thing as digital has to be our aim for energy infrastructure. Second point, research. Take electricity and storage technologies. For the moment, you can't store electricity, or you can via hydro in the Alps, but not in the northern part of Germany. The one and only technology is to bring water upstairs when you have enough solar and wind, and to bring it down to bring it again to a power infrastructure. But technologies we don't have. And it's better to invest in a European research team with our European industries than 27 stand alone. Research and energy efficiency, research and hydrogen, research and take new materials, raw and rare materials. It's a clear added value to be a European public-private team. We have to see a triangle for energy and climate change policies. First part, sustainability. So a pragmatic Green Deal. Let me say a pragmatic Green Deal. Sometimes it seems that Brussels is not really pragmatic, but too fundamental, but it's a second thing. Second point, price. 10, 15 years ago, we have been thinking the higher the price, the better, because it's good for energy efficiency. Meanwhile, we see if the price is too high, it's against reliable price, it's against our families, it's against that everybody can use gas and heating and electricity. And it's against our industries. Take voestalpine in Linz, a high-tech company for steel production and aluminium. They are in a global competition with Turkish, with Chinese, with Indian, with American companies. And it's a commodity, as chemical industries are, as copper industries are. If we want to survive in Linz, in Duisburg, in Luxembourg, we need acceptable prices, comparable prices to our competitors, or we will lose the competition. So price. And third point, sustainability is clear, price is clear, and security of supply. We need power and gas for electricity, for heating, 24/7. Day by day, night by night. And I think this triangle has to be the platform, the fundament for all of our energy strategies all over Europe. Putin, mentioned by Martin Selmayr, and I'm really happy that Europe is a family, is a united Europe, is not willing to accept dividend impera the game Putin or other autocrats and dictators would prefer and propose to us, that Putin is not able to weaken Europe really. He has three instruments: his army, soldiers, weapons, firstly, grain, secondly, and thirdly, energy. And he's attacking Ukraine by his army, by rockets, and he's indirectly attacking Europe by blocking gas flow, by using and misusing gas and oil as a pragmatic, efficient instrument against our European Union, mainly against new member states, Bulgaria, Central European member states, Austria, Slovakia, and Germany as a high industrialized member state, which was depending to Gazprom by more than 50%. A next reason why to Europeanize energy policies, our emission trade system, ETS. It's a non-bureaucratic, market-based system for to see how to reduce CO2 emissions by market-based instruments, by users, consumers, by us, by our industries. I think we should complete and modernize our ETS system. And we should widen it for mobility and for other industrial sectors and for housing as well, for to see the whole dimension of our emissions from industries, from the private sector, from all over Europe. The Energy Charter Treaty, Austria in the north of the Western Balkans, Slovenia, Croatia. I think here we have to speak about the membership of the 6 Western Balkans. There was a conference in Berlin yesterday and today. There is some more speed, and we have to see energy can be a door opener for a full membership. Energy union, same rules, infrastructure, grid systems, maybe an LNG terminal for the Eastern Adriatic Sea. There's a lot of ideas, and for me, Vienna always was an energy hub. Martin Selmayr mentioned OPEC. I could mention Baumgarten as a real hub. I could mention the International Atomic Energy Agency, located here, and the Director General, meanwhile, is so often in Ukraine for to check security of nuclear power systems. So Vienna is the best place to speak about how to Europeanize energy policies, how to come to a real functioning energy union. So welcome again, and I'm happy to see many panelists, experts, and we are interested to get some new ideas and for to see how to use this conference for next steps of the Commission and our member states' governments. Thanks to all of you.
Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, lieber Herr Schüssel, es ist eine große Freude, dass Sie heute uns die Ehre geben, lieber Hausherr, lieber Herr Oettinger. Ich habe mir erlaubt, in Deutsch kurz die Begrüßung für den Senat zu machen. Es wäre zu viel, wenn ich jetzt noch Statements zu euch beiden, Herr Oettinger, lieber Martin, geben würde, weil hier ist alles gesagt, um was es geht. Und ich glaube, wir sollten heute uns die Chance geben, dass unsere Panels das wiedergeben, was eine Gesellschaft braucht, die kontrovers, die auf der Ebene unserer Demokratie hineinschaut und nicht wegschaut. Und das haben Sie in Ihrer Präsentation eindeutig aufgezeigt, um was es geht. Es geht um das Wir, und Europa ist nur im Wir zu verstehen. Es ist eine Familie, und so wie wir heute auch sind, der Senat der Wirtschaft ist ursprünglich ein Think Tank für eine ökologische, soziale Gesellschaft gegründet worden und hat dann mutiert, wenn man so schön sagt, in einen Tudenk. Deswegen stehen wir heute hier. Und ich danke unseren Partnern von United Europe und dem Präsidenten von United Europe, Herrn Oettinger, dass es uns gelungen ist, noch in diesem Jahr ein Zusammentreffen zu organisieren auf diesem Platz, auf unserem Heimatplatz hier im Haus für Europa in Wien. Und dazu möchte ich mich herzlichst bedanken, lieber Martin, lieber Herr Oettinger, unseren Ehrengast heute, an Herrn Dr. Schüssel. Und lasst uns den Tag oder den späten Nachmittag in den Abend hinein genießen, indem dass wir Lösungen in einer freien Gedankenwelt, in einer gestalterischen Gedankenwelt für unsere Gesellschaft schaffen, wie ich es gerne sage, für eine enkeltaugliche Gesellschaft und Zukunft. Ich danke euch.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to do the first panel, and I invite the panelists to come up, and we'll try and get on speedily, given we have limited time. If you'd like to come up, please. You've got all the details of the panelists in the literature in front of you, and we have essentially live in person. We have 3 panelists here, and we have 1 panelist in Brussels. Good evening. So we're all set to go. I'm not going to go into all of the details of the biographies. As I said, it's all in the literature, and you know who everybody is. So I think what we're going to do is to sort of just start and just get on. And so where I start with is just, I think, the question I think we can ask ourselves in November, early November of 2022 is how on earth did we get here? We're supposed to have an energy market, we're supposed to have diverse supplies, we're supposed to have free competition, we're efficient markets, well regulated by the Union and by the member states. How on earth did this happen? And how did we get ourselves in this situation? And I think that's not an unreasonable question to ask, as European consumers are receiving higher and higher energy bills. What happened? How did this come about? And what do we do for the future? That I don't think is, these are unreasonable questions to ask. So perhaps I might start, Angela, if you were willing to start by just giving a few words, and we'll just run through the panel, and then we'll have a little interchange, and then we'll open it to the floor. And I think it's important as far as possible to engage with a degree of Q&A to get some proper participation and insight and thoughts. Okay.
So the first, yes, it's on. Good evening, and thanks for inviting me to this discussion on energy security and the important question on what do we do now. In my statement, I would like to extend the discussion on energy security from a mainly supply side perspective with some demand side aspects, which usually are pushed back in these days. If you look at the current global energy crisis, which is triggered by the economic recovery in the second half of last year, we sometimes forget that, and the Ukrainian war, of course, we see that the current energy system faces profound vulnerabilities, which currently culminate in disruptions in energy markets, and it's not only the gas market, and which culminates in economic and social pressure. The risk of energy supply shortages is faced today, and the dependency on Russia as supplier with a strong market power have been set aside for many years in favor of favorable prices and abundance of fossil energy. I think this availability of relative cheap fossil energy over long periods has led to corresponding consumption and production processes that go hand in hand with high import dependency. And despite the evidence from climate science and the urgent need to reduce the reliability on fossil energy, gas is called a bridging technology which adds to the dependency of industry, households, and the power sector. In addition, the topic of energy efficiency, from my point of view, has not been paid sufficient importance. I think that the current energy crisis will not be overcome by striving to substitute the lost gas supply from Russia, mainly by increased LNG gas imports or other pipeline imports from other suppliers. But I do think that it requires a broader perspective that addresses multiple issues simultaneously. I think that a change of perspective, and this is, for me, this is very important, a change of perspective from a focus on energy supply to a focus on the question what for and how do we use energy is a necessary step towards more reliable structures. If you read about the situation, the current situation, you often read that the opinion that it's very likely that once we successfully mastered this crisis, we will see radically changed structures, which are driven by two topics. The first one would be energy security aspect. We heard about this already today. And by the way, this has long been on the EU agenda and seen as an important driver for renewable. The second issue would be the climate crisis. Climate science almost provides us every day with new evidence that doing nothing will increase the risk of huge economic damage and the danger of irreversible climate change. Both topics point that the current structures are not sustainable and that we need profound changes. And this actually can be facilitated by innovation. We already heard about research from Mr. Oettinger, by technologies, which we already know to a certain extent, and also by behavioral change that is shaping processes towards less energy consumption, or at least an improvement in energy efficiency and less emission intensity. I would argue that a perspective on the energy system from a demand-side perspective would lead to a profound increase in energy productivity and would put energy services into focus instead, as we're always used to look at energy flows. And we have to have in mind that energy services are always a combination of stocks and flows, and the identical energy service can be provided with very different stock flow combinations, the ones using more energy and the other ones using less energy. Of course, in order to move in that direction, we strongly need to accelerate investment. And to give an example of such investment with an energy system perspective, one can take the gas demand of households in the EU, which is approximately 25% of gas use in the EU. In Austria, it's about 20%. And this demand could be reduced drastically through a more efficient building stock and alternative heating system like low energy heat networks, like energy networks, and the use of geothermal. So actually what we are using now for heating in the housing sector could be really reduced and substituted by other structures. I think if you would try to think more intensely along these lines, we could reduce the vulnerabilities associated with the current system, and which definitely, as you said in the beginning, have been underestimated, how they can hurt our economies and societies.
Can I just say,
yes.
So we've got a time issue, but what I want to say was what you're getting at, I think, is very, very, sorry, what is very, very important is this sense of understanding that the potential of the efficiency issues, say, as you're saying, with buildings, are so critical, because when you stand back and look at it now, we're paying all of this amount of money out for energy costs, and that would it not be hugely cheaper? I understand it is fragmented, difficult to do, and takes time, but given the costs we've had and the shock we've had, surely that it makes more sense to go in that direction.
This is definitely what I would argue. I mean, of course, all these changes cannot be made immediately, and of course, all what has been said in trying to secure supply over the next years and diversifying supplies are important as well. But I think we are used to, once we are confronted with a shock, we are used to just stare at the shock and probably forget about other ways and other pathways and other alternatives we at least should at the same time try to initiate.
This is what I think. This is a really good and key point. If you don't mind, I'd like to move on, but it's great. Thank you. So now, perhaps you have some observations on where we are and and how we got here. So I'll leave it over to you.
Thank you. Yes, I do, actually. To start it, I'm Polish, so I might have a slightly different view on the energy security issue. This is I think for Eastern European countries, this is the I told you so moment, because countries like Poland, Lithuania, all the other Balts have been dealing with this since many, many years, and we were actually the ones to try to explain to the Western European partners that this might not be a good idea to be so dependent on Russia for a long time. And in fact, for the many, many years, against any economic logic, because there was no joint procurement, for instance, Eastern European countries would be paying higher prices to Russia than Western European partners. And I remember very much that one of the first major strategic decisions Poland has made in 1989, in fact in 1991, so shortly after the change, was to sign first contracts with Norway for importing gas. Those contracts were like dropped and then remade, and it took us 30 years to get there. But now we have a Baltic pipeline, which is essentially replacing a lot of Russian gas, and we've built LNG terminals in many years before. So one word of warning: it took us 30 years to get here, but we are pretty much independent now. So the word of warning is that it might take time to, but the strategic element was very important. And I remember you, Hans Harrer, last year we met on the meeting. It was shortly after passing of Edvard Busek, and you have this wonderful quotation from him saying, "A bisschen aufwachen tarat uns alle gut." And I think this is exactly what we need to do at the European Union. We need to wake up, because we need to wake up that there are some people who don't want good for us in the world, and one of those was Putin. But it's not the only dependency we are heading towards, because one of the things is obviously that we might be building dependencies in other energy supply elements, such as import of solar panels you were mentioning, or battery components, or wind power components. So my appel would be not to make the same mistakes twice. So how we got there? Well, unfortunately, one of the reasons we got there is there was not enough solidarity in the European Union before. So there was a short window of opportunity, 2014, when the European Commission tried to initiate the energy union. And in fact, it was many countries against it, such as Germany. They were pushing the Nord Stream project. They didn't want to build strategic sovereignty. So I really hope that we're not making the same mistakes again. So what do we need? I have up 4 points, and 3 of them have been said already. So I will not repeat all of it, but I might want to make it a bit more concrete. So Martin Selmayr was mentioning joint procurement. I think that's a very good idea. And I would actually think that it has to go beyond the European market, because as far as I understand, in the future we'll be much more reliant on LNG, and it will be a more global market than it is now, because we will the rest reliant on pipes, which means that we will be competing with Southeast Asia and other countries. So if we want to go joint procurement, we need to go bold and try to find partnerships with the rest of the world to be able to, manage the buyer, to have a buyer monopoly. Maybe it's just to counteract the balance of powers there. A second point was the point of technological sovereignty you were mentioning. And I think we have a vehicle for that with the IPCEI program at the European level. And it's just a wonderful vehicle to be doing this more in the future, to be developing our own technologies, not to make the same mistakes as we did with the solar panels, and keep those key sovereignty in those technologies in our hand, and do it at the European level and not at the level of 27 states. The third point would be to go for strategic partnerships across the Atlantic and in TTC, which is also a very good vehicle to be able to move technology for energy efficiency and energy independence on this jointly with our partners from the liberal part of the world, and to counterbalance maybe the Chinese developments there. And the fourth point was already said also, that we need grids, we need to build infrastructure at European level, and I kind of like to call it the fifth fundamental freedom of the EU. We have 4 freedoms, and we have them because we understood at the European level that division of labor and division of task is something which economically makes sense, because there are things called comparative advantages. And comparative advantage can be in the labor, capital, and energy as well, and production of energy. So the existence of European grids is something which will allow us to have a free flow of energy as we have a free flow of labor, which would be an immense economic benefit to the towards of the EU. So there has to be a European project for that, so that we can use offshore and in the north and transport it cheaply and efficiently, because and this would help our cause, I think, in the future. So that's my statement.
That's great, and precise and speedy. Excellent. Okay, over to you, Annika.
Does it work like this? Okay.
Like this. They're all long. They're all live.
Okay, I'm sitting here for Uniper, and I think if I'm invited to this panel, it's because, we're a company that's operating in 40 countries. We're headquartered in Germany, but the reason I sit here is probably that we were one of, or maybe the biggest client of Gazprom until recently. We just published our losses this morning. We've incurred 10 billion of losses just until last month, and it might be another 30 billion to come as a momentaneous picture. So this has thrown us in a very existential crisis. Uniper emerged out of E.ON and Ruhrgas. So we're looking back on an energy partnership of 4 to 5, actually 5 decades. And I have many colleagues who still worked at Ruhrgas and who very vividly remember the good times. And for very long, and until last autumn, actually until February, we couldn't imagine the amount and the extent of escalation we would see, the curtailment, this aggressive war. It was simply not in our books, because everything we had seen so far was a very reliable relationship for most of the time. And I believe that even politics for the longest time believed in this mantra that, even if politics is not going well, and it hasn't been going well for the past years, there's still the commercial relationship. And why would Russia, with a very high dependency of its national budget on fuel exports, why would it solve its own, the branch it's sitting on? But we were proved wrong. Here we sit now. I think this is a formidable moment in time, and I was happy today in Vienna that there's a lot of real newspapers still. So I found a New York Times, and they were thinking, like, what could be this year? What would this year be remembered for? Would it be the UK falling apart? Would it be China? Or could it also be the European moment and the real transition that we're making, that you've worked on? And I think for this, it's really important, and I really am very, I pay my respects to the Commission for working day and night and literally through New Year's and through the weekends on all these different initiatives that are coming about, and for really putting a formidable effort together to accelerate the transition. I think now it's really important that we look at the practical elements and really all hands on deck and think about like what are still the roadblocks to now start off work on hydrogen, on renewables, on the diversification. I'm sure we will still talk also about joint purchasing. We have our opinion here, obviously, but and also the market. I just want to say maybe at this point we're in a time of crisis, and we should not forget that. We're currently discussing a lot of measures to intervene on the market, but the market will swing back at some point, and we should just be sure that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater and change the system that has been serving us well and that has worked quite well until this extraordinary time that we're living through. So much for now.
Yeah, I think actually, Annika, that's actually quite an important point about not actually throwing the market away. In many ways, the effect of the market principles has actually seen a situation where we have been managed to fill the storage, we've been able to reduce use, staggering reductions of consumer use. So that has worked. I think one of the points I would make, I mean, obviously I have been a very great critic of Gazprom and Nord Stream 2 for many years, but I actually would say that even I would not have thought they would have done what they've done. And I don't think nobody can actually say to the German energy companies or the Austrian energy companies, this would have happened. I think it's very good to, the great book on the Russian-German-Austrian gas relationship is Thane Gustafsson's book, which came out only a couple of years ago, The Bridge, which is a great read on very readable discussion and debate on the relationship. And when you read that, it's clear that the Soviet state and then the Russian state put so much effort, time, and capital into it that you couldn't. I can see why you wouldn't believe they went as far as they did. And I can see that if it's Poland and the Baltic states, they will always have they will always be ready to cut things off or leave or whatever. But the core of the relationship was a relationship with Western Europe, and particularly with Germany and Austria. And I can see why the level of commitment over 60 years would indicate they would not do that. So I can see why Uniper and other companies did what they did. But I will stop there and perhaps move over to the Commission. And Mechthild, I think you probably working night and day trying to sort all of this out and provide some structure on chaos to a degree. So one of the questions I think I could ask is about the issue to do with the market and the extent to which we're going to be able to retain a functioning market system under the enormous demands from consumers for lower prices, the security demands, and the need to deal with the energy transition. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and sorry to not be in person in Vienna and now joining from Brussels. Let me start with a few points, but I'm happy to come back to your questions and also points from the previous speakers and panelists. So first of all, I absolutely agree we are in an unprecedented crisis. In a war situation, I would say nobody has predicted or seen. So this has changed dramatically, even though we saw increasing energy prices since more than a year. But since the 24th of February, we are living in another world. And I can only say from the European Commission point of view, I think we have changed in speed to react to it and do our utmost with the member states, with the European Parliament, with the stakeholders to help to come out of the crisis with measures which have already been very well explained by Martin Selmayr and others, which measures targeting the short term, but also the long term. So coming back to your question, why this happened and couldn't we have been better prepared? I think one should not forget in the last 10, 20 years, We have created an internal market for gas and electricity. We have the infrastructure, and some member states, as it was mentioned, did maybe better than others. Poland is rather independent from Russian gas. We have decades of investments which paid off this year, for example, with the infrastructure interconnection Lithuania, Poland, with the Baltic pipeline, and using full speed the LNGs we have. So there are good examples which make us in a better situation than maybe it could have been before. So the internal market, the European Green Deal, and all our priorities have helped us creating an energy market and speed to the clean energy transition, which our member states fully support. Still, and that was also said since the crisis broke out, we have accelerated and we need to accelerate, we need to do more. That's the reply of Repower EU, which was already explained. And let me now go maybe to highlight 2-3 things out of that and reacting to your question. Why did we do the gas storage regulation? It's a market intervention. A lot of member states had no gas storage regulation. It was so that in summer prices were down, gas filling happened, and in winter the gas storages were full. Unfortunately, that was not the case winter 21-22, so the previous winter. And we knew with the crisis and the high energy prices, we wouldn't have got the storages full. That's why we came up within 3 months, March till June, with this gas storage regulation. And as it was mentioned, we are at 95% gas storage filling, which helped us this winter. It had a price. Prices peaked in August, when some member states, including Germany, obviously, and others, had to buy and fill. But it was the only thing to do. Without the full gas storages in all our member states, in most and in all, we wouldn't be in that preparation. So we had to intervene. This gas storage regulation, without, we would have another situation and much more scarcity. So there are 2 problems. There's the scarcity of gas and the price problem. And with the gas storage, at least for this winter, we are in a relatively comfortable situation. A second example, it's what we are doing now with the joint procurement. I know it's a long story, but it's rather complicated. We need the member states, and for now it's voluntary, our proposal. The only part which is mandatory in our proposal, our most recent, is the storage filling. So the link that 15% of next year's filling should be done in a joint purchasing. Let's see how member states react. We would like to do more, but we need all member states, and we hear different voices here. And my next example, I think what we need to do is the short term and the market intervention. We used, except for the gas storage regulation, for the other 3 packages from before summer and now in October, Article 1 to 2, which means it's emergency situation. We have never used it in energy. It's really temporary, it's exceptional. We are really pushing for gas demand reduction, electricity demand reduction, solidarity contribution, revenue caps. We are intervening in the market, but it's an exceptional temporary tool we are using, which is 6 months, 1 year, depending on the agreement with member states. So we are having in record speed proposals, and then also member states, frankly, in record speed who adopt it. Article 1 to 2 means that it doesn't include in the decision making in the European Parliament. So we have reached out to explain our measures to the European Parliament, who is backing our proposals. And obviously there is now an established contact group, like we did in COVID, for energy, to explain in a very, very regular manner on what we are doing out of that crisis. So we have a mixture of short-term measures, temporary measures where we intervene in the market, but we also, hand in hand with that, we are going and continue accelerate our medium and long-term measures. And that was mentioned. It's energy efficiency, it's renewables deployment, offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, and it's also green hydrogen and heat pumps. And there we have a speed which we have never seen. So the short-term measures and the long-term measures need to go hand in hand. It's a lot on our table, but I think we have done our utmost, and we have, which was also underlined, our member states with us. And that's really, really what we need in the crisis right now. I'll stop here, and there will be more questions.
Yeah, I'm just going to run a question past you, which I actually had from talking to some of the US LNG companies who are looking at selling more LNG to Europe. Now, the problem they say is we can only, the problem is Germany can buy 4 LNG regasification ships relatively cheaply. I think the one in Klaipėda in Lithuania cost $150 million for 4 billion cubic meters of capacity, which is a huge bang for buck in that term. But the problem is the other end of it is the preparation of the gas fields, the pipelines, and the liquefaction facilities are expensive. We're talking billions of dollars. And what the Americans were saying was that they can spend the money on this, but they need long-term supply contracts, which normally are for 20 years. But obviously the problem is how do you fit that with the energy transition? And the observation that I made on all of this was that, well, Gazprom has 154 long-term supply contracts with European customers, all of which now are in force majeure, many of which run on to, or broken basically, which run on, some of them as late as 2049. So so what they were saying, they were getting some pushback or resistance to 20-year contracts. But if we have a situation that we're not taking the gas from Russia, there's no net increase in actual overall use of gas or using it for a longer period than we intended to. All you're doing is replacing the gas which is provided from Russia with gas which is provided from America or from Qatar or whoever. So what I was wondering, do you think it would be possible to be able to do the sort of contracts that we need? Because the issue is going to be, I think, that once we're able to fill up storage this winter, because for about 5 or 6 months we've got a lot of Russian gas, we have to work on the basis we're going to have no Russian gas this coming winter, for 23, 24, assuming that we are kind of in winter already, although the temperatures will give you a different impression. But given the fact we will have this problem for 23, 24, and possibly 24, 25, and we have a long-running issue with a kind of hole in gas supply which we need to deal with, is that sort of approach to dealing with ensuring we have enough gas supply a potential way forward?
Thank you. I think this is a very crucial question. First of all, we have to replace Russian gas urgently. As you said, we are heading for this winter relatively comfortable, but we have the next winters most likely without gas, at least with Russian gas, at least with very, very much reduced gas. So we have to replace it. And there the US has been very helpful. Norway, we have a little bit more from Azerbaijan, Israel eventually, and others. So this is really to replace Russian gas. It's not new gas, it's replacement of the Russian gas. We also try with partners like Norway to have a medium to longer term view and look at hydrogen and renewable hydrogen or low carbon hydrogen. This is really to make that bridge to the future. I know there's a lot of hype about hydrogen, but we can really in the longer run see how we can use low carbon hydrogen. Obviously, one of our key objectives also out of REPower is 10 million tons of green hydrogen produced within Europe, but also 10 million tons imported from our partners. So we can make that bridge with our long-term transition and become carbon neutral by 2050 with high ambitious targets also for 2030, while still replacing Russian gas right now urgently because we need it, and also in the future decarbonize that gas. Either by bringing in hydrogen or CCS, carbon capture and storage. So I think we can make that bridge, and it's part of our negotiation with our partners, with the US, Norway, and the others.
That's very helpful, kind of broad answer. So I was wondering, can I bring anybody else in on this?
No, I think, Alan, you raised a very crucial question, and we're encountering this problem already now on site in our negotiations with international partners. We are also trading and importing LNG. We have a number of vessels under Uniper flag, and it is very difficult to explain that that they want offtake guarantees that go way beyond our decarbonization goals. It is also difficult to always bring the financial guarantees, especially for, a company like ours at the moment in the situation. This is where I think politics could really bring a very important role, which is in a way the political backing of such relationships. They have to be somewhat long-term. And I think it's important that we come to terms also on the question of long-term contracts, because there has been a back and forth on this. At some point, they were not desirable, then there were, we wanted more liquidity in the market, but then now we see in terms of price, it's actually quite useful. Also in terms of some planning and investment security, it would be good to have clear guidance from the political level.
I wouldn't add 2 points. One Angela was making before, and one on the question of gas. I think the one issue which we also need to think about when the energy transitions is countries such as Austria will be reliant on gas for electricity production also in the future. It's essentially impossible to have any other source at the moment in Austria in winter. So in yearly average, we produce about 17% from gas, but in winter is much more, because in the summer we're mostly reliant on wind, water and solar energy. So the big question is how we're going to get enough green gas to be able to manage this. And then obviously that also will increase electricity demand. So the goals we have at the Austrian level now are very ambitious, already assuming that we'll not have to have an additional electricity demand covered by production of green gas or green hydrogen to gas to power back again in winter. So I think these are the elephants in the room we need to discuss. And the second point you were making was about the industry and about needing to reduce demand. I agree with you that the industry is the biggest emitter of CO2 emissions and the biggest and gas and electricity consumer in the country. Well, the problem is that if we don't keep the industry here in Europe, we will lose on two fronts. We will lose on the economic front and on the environmental front, because I think it's still better if first is sitting in Linz with very strict environmental regulation before it sits somewhere there are no environmental regulation to produce the same steel.
That's a very good point.
And the other point is that because many people think like, okay, so what? Where the steel is not produced in Austria, then it's produced somewhere else. Well, the point is that the industry in Europe is a major driver of innovation. I was looking at the data recently, and if you look at the patent data, 85% of patents of companies in Germany come from the industry. In Austria, it's about 2/3. Like one company in Austria, Borealis, is responsible for more than 10% patents in the EPO. So you have to think about what happens if we don't have those companies here. So it's really essential for the innovation power of the European Union that we have this clean, cheap energy and as quick as possible, because it does make a difference, I think, where you produce things also on this matter.
Oh, I didn't mean that we shouldn't have the industry here. My point was that being used to relatively cheap energy for many years, this shaped consumption and production processes. And of course, also because of the climate goals, we are now talking about changing industrial processes. And I think we have to speed up in this case. And Austria, I mean, I'm always very astonished how innovative firms are in Austria. There's one project which I hope does not die but will go on, which is a sectoral cooperation on carbon capture and utilization. And I think this definitely will drive the industrial strengths of a country like Austria. But when I'm following here this discussion, I think we need to balance thinking between securing energy supply also for the near future, Also, I would like to mention this context that in the recent World Energy Outlook of the IEA states the end of the golden age of gas demand growth. So I think we also should have in mind that what this means. And I think all the options of substituting gas, be it from other gas suppliers or in the longer term from other energy sources, they will only be successful if we also succeed in providing our energy services with less energy flows.
That's very interesting. It shows you the kind of direction and the sense that also, I suppose, industry, by virtue of these price pressures, is actually finding ways. By virtue of using the price pressures, they are finding ways to reduce demand and change the pattern of use over time and become more efficient. But nevertheless, the shock initially is significant. Right. What I'd like to do now is we have about less than 10 minutes left, but we'd like to take 2 or 3 questions. So put your hand up, give your name and your affiliation. Okay, the gentleman over here. I don't know if we can get a... there we are.
Yeah, thank you. Dietmar Breinsdorfer, E-Control from the Austrian regulator. One of the founding fathers of the European Union, Jean Monnet, said, nothing is possible without people, nothing is durable without institutions. Very often, unfortunately, and asking this question now because Mechthild Wörsdorfer is here and Mr. Oettinger was here, very often these institutions are very slow. Give you an example in the energy sector. Commissioner Oettinger announced in 2014, I was in the room, the completion of the internal energy market. One very important thing in this regard is flow-based market coupling on all European borders. Yeah? We completed it in 22, so this year. And this legislative package comes from the so-called third package, which was brought forward even by the predecessor of Mr. Oettinger, by Mr. Piebalgs. So I say that we have a problem, Brussels, we have a problem when we are so slow in implementation. And I personally find it equally important to come from the idea to the decision and the implementation much faster. This needs to be speeded up, and it's equally important to have quicker procedures. Mr. Selmayr mentioned it, how long it takes to build wind farms, solar installations, power grids, and so on, and also the processes of the marketplace take place. I think it's equally important to have this process speeded up as we fill the gas storage in next winter, because otherwise we would be also lost. So this is my question in particular to Ms. Wörsdorfer, maybe to the others who want, and the panel, how we can manage this problem.
Should
I come in?
Yeah, sure. Yes, please.
Okay. I think it's a very fair question. The question of implementation, because we have our 27 member states. We had the clean energy package, as it was mentioned by the speaker, which was adopted in 2018, 2019, and it still takes 3 or 4 years for full implementation. We are monitoring that. There are legal tools to speed that up, but our preferred option is obviously the dialogue and the exchange of best practice with the member states. We have different forums where we work together on electricity, on gas market implementation, where we try to speed things up and help the member states to speed things up. And I think if we look at the electricity market and where we are right now, we have made a lot of progress. I mean, we are in a very, very difficult situation. I mean, much less gas. We had the problem of nuclear in France, and still the droughts. And still we have no blackouts, electricity is flowing. So I think we have to balance the approach. There might be some slowness in some of the implementation, but overall, I think the progress is there. And to the concrete question of permitting of renewables, we have in our proposal, which was also the clean energy package, on our renewables directive, already the necessary steps for speeding up permitting. Member states should set up one-stop shops. There is also some measures to reduce it from many years to 2 years for wind farms, and solar even 6 months. That has been reinforced with Repower. And next week, as the European Council asked us, we will do an emergency proposal on this speeding up of permitting. I hope it will go through, because we will need our 27 member states then to agree on it. But we see also here, until our proposal on the renewables directive, the renewed one, and Repower, it takes probably until the end of this year to agree in the trilogues, but then to implement, as I said before, it can take 2-3 years. But in order to learn out of the crisis, and on this concrete example of permitting, next week we should come up with a 1 to 2, meaning this can be implemented for this winter already and for next winter, because we also need more renewables, we need more onshore and offshore to be deployed faster. So we are having concrete examples where we push more on the implementation side as well.
Yes, that's a very comprehensive answer. Does anyone else want to come in on the speed, or I shall ask another question? Okay, and any more questions? Don't be shy, put your hand up. Sorry?
I'm happy to come on to say something on the implementation.
Okay, sure.
Because this is a very valid point, and I think it's very important what you just said, Ms. Wörsdorfer. And I would like to add on hydrogen. We're currently focusing on security of supply. We should do one without leaving the other. So just to give one example of one of our projects in the north of Germany, we're currently, or maybe I should start differently. We said, how did we get here? And maybe the story of the Russian dependency is also a story of the non-built LNG terminals in Europe and also in Germany. Germany doesn't have an LNG terminal. Now 4 regasification units will come online, hopefully by the end of the year, ours for sure. And we have tried to plan this since the 70s. We've run market study after market study, and never there was enough demand. Last time we abandoned it was last summer. And then now, due to the situation, we were able to take this out of the drawer and realize it very quickly, also with the help of politics, to really speed up permission and permitting procedures. And at that very location, we're now building this regasification unit. There's infrastructure that is in place that is very good for LNG, but we're also planning a hydrogen cracker, and we are planning an ammonia terminal. These are different infrastructures, but using the same pipes, hopefully one day. I would hope that we can get that formidable acceleration also now for hydrogen, which means to really bring some regulatory roadblocks out of the way, which is this additionality discussion. And I think if we can get that out of the way, you will see that industry has a lot of projects already ready, and we are just waiting for these roadblocks to be taken out of the way to really kick them off, and realize that way also to diversification.
That's also quite comprehensive. So what I was going to say was that the other observation I suppose is worth making is that the EU has speeded up in terms of under the pressure of, first of all, the pandemic, and then the war and the consequences of the war. That pressure creates enormous sort of incentives to act, and act with speed and effectiveness. Probably the most dramatic one is the synchronization of Ukraine, Moldova with the European grids, which was, I think, is supposed to take 3 years. We did it in less than 3 months. You see what is possible, and I wonder if the Union will 2 months, yeah. If the Union, I think it may well be that the Union and the member states can learn from this in terms of the ability, given the pressures, to act more quickly. Because it's not as if we're going to be, the war is ended, the war is continuing. There are lots and lots of consequences. One of them, of course, is dealing with all of the destruction of Ukrainian energy infrastructure and helping dealing with that, and the knock-on effects on ourselves. So there are lots of issues here which we will have to deal with at speed, and that I suspect it's going to have an impact on European decision-making as well, in terms of just having to do things not at the normal leisurely pace we have done them in the past. The 27 member states having to accept that action is required this day. So at that point, I shall stop. Oh, sorry, I think, can I take one more question? I'm allowed to take one more question. Okay, the gentleman over here, and then I think we'll have to give it a go. This is the, okay.
Thank you. So, representing Lithuania here, as someone who in the camp, we told you so. I think first of all, let us. I'm actually coming out of this discussion with a lot of optimism. I think we should first of all congratulate ourselves how well we have dealt with this crisis so far. I think Europe once again has proven that it can deal with a good crisis. And as you know, in a couple of days' time, I think the storages in Germany will be full. The weather is on our side. The prices of TTF are collapsing. So I think in the short term, I'm very optimistic. And one correction, Alan, I think you did predict that this is going to be this way. I think you were one of the first people who actually saw the problem with the energy policy in Europe, that we failed to recognize that it is a geopolitical tool, not a commercial tool. But here's my sort of question. What I'm missing in all of this discussion is a clear distinction between what is temporary and what is long-term. Right now, I feel we're still fighting the short-term battle. And in all of this fog of war, I don't see a clear convergence on what is the medium and long-term strategy. And the danger here is, whilst we're actually doing really well in the short term, the danger is that I see there is a bit of a breakdown in consensus at the European level. I think everyone is trying to do their own thing. And I think that's the main risk, that we will, once again, everyone will do their own solution at the national level. So that's my question. What do you think is the new normal? And will we have a European solution or a national solution?
Does anyone like to take that question? Okay. Okay, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think it's a very good question. And as I would say, there is a lot of focus on the short term, but what is maybe less discussed, we are continuing and accelerating all the proposals, for example, Fit for 55. I mean, we are in trilogues, that is very bureaucratic language, but we are in negotiations on our renewable proposal with 45% renewables by 2030. We are negotiating with the Parliament and Council right now, next week again, energy efficiency, and we are doing the structural changes. So in parallel with all this crisis management, which gets a lot, and rightly so, a lot of our attention, and which needs to be done very, very fast together, we are also working together with the member states and Parliament on the CO2 emissions from cars, which was adopted last week, that there are no new combustion cars by 2035. So we are working to get an agreement on renewables, something close to 45% renewables by 2030. We are working on this energy efficiency first principle and all the measures. So it's done in parallel, and there is also a willingness from member states, obviously the devil is sometimes in detail, to continue and we even accelerate, as I said, with the permitting as one example for renewables, to see what can be done here. So I think we need to do both, but it's also happening right now. Thank you.
I want to add one more thing, because we were mentioning the prices, and I think we've been much more clear about the difference between the short-term and the long-term prices in the energy market. So you were mentioning, yes, the TTF is collapsing. There were several hours last week which were negative prices because we have tons of LNG ships in front of Europe and the weather is good, but it did not change much about the future price. So if you look at Cal 23, it's at 150 euros. It used to be at 200, but it's not much lower. And if you look at 26, it's still at 60 euro, which is 3-4 times times more than we used to have in the last years. So when I was thinking about the competitiveness of Europe, we really seriously need to think about the long term, because I have the impression that the media is now saying, okay, the problem's over because, you know, the energy price is so low and the gas is so low. It's like, no, it's not. It's enough to look at the contract for the next year and then 5 years ahead. And it's just much more higher than it used to be and much higher than what the Americans will be paying in 5 years. And this is the crucial issue, and we still have no solution for that. And it's independent on the short or of the short. It's not a critique. I want to stress the point that the short long-term distinction must be much clearer, I think, in the public discussion.
That's a good point. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to take. I think I have to stop. I'd like you to stay here, and whilst we bring in the new panel. But in the meantime, I'd like you to sort of applaud in the usual fashion, our extremely good and interesting panel. Thank you very much. Future energy prospects. You could also subtitle this, "What are we going to do now then?" So the way we're going to do this is very simple. Last time we went from left to right. This time we're going to go from right to left. And so this is just in short, in terms of, so you can see, so in terms of how you can see, why is it working? Is it working? It is working. Okay, perhaps I didn't have it close enough. So we're going this time from right to left, and we've got a fine panel. We've got Mr. Kobylev, who is well known, Andrei Kobylev, the former CEO of Naftogaz, the great liberalizer of the Ukrainian energy market. Valery Forden, the Director General of the European Nuclear Society. Stefan Sharma, Chairman of the Board of Energy Burgenland. Tim Joris Kaiser with the European Commission here in Austria. And Christina Matazzarani-Wagner, Director of Electricity E-Control. So we've got a kind of broad range of people with different experiences who hope can answer this question, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do now? Okay, enough of me, over to Tom. Do you want to start?
Yeah, thanks very much, and good evening to everybody. I must say I'm excited to be on this panel because I think the experiences, as you described them already, should make for a very interesting contribution to this particular discussion. And thanks very much for the question that you posed to the last question, because of course the last panel, because that was a brilliant lead over, obviously. So indeed, the last panel discussed the great strides that have been made already and the priorities that are, shall we say, before us in the short to medium term. So here to discuss the future prospects, of course, this very panel. And there's various in Mechthild's answer, and most particularly to your question, there was the way ahead, basically across the longer term, was set out for us. Great strides have been made already, and it just bears repeating that obviously in the short term, in particular, our focus is to end dependence on Russian fossil fuels. But beyond that, I like the dictum very much of Mr. Harrer, who called for an enkeltauglich solution. So to those who didn't possibly catch that, that's a grandchild-compatible future, essentially. So let's still have a planet some decades from now. So while in the short term, the emphasis is very much on the diversification of the fossil fuels, as we've just been discussing, the saving, so the energy efficiency and the renewables are obviously our priority from here on out, and that very much goes for the European Commission, and that's compatible also with the classification of the financial activities that we consider to be sustainable in the so-called taxonomy, which we'll no doubt end up talking about in a little bit, given our excellent panel tonight. So the two big themes here then, across the longer future, are energy saving and the renewables. And obviously, as we've just also heard already, business has one thing and another to contribute to both. I think by now everybody's heard the dictum as well. If we want things to remain the same, things will have to change. I think that's about half right, in the sense that things will definitely have to change. What exactly is going to be, we'll be able to keep the same, let's say, is I think up for debate to some part. Business, however, can contribute, of course, in great ways, and that's mostly in terms of innovation. So we can extend the discussion on gas, but obviously move into the other fields here as well, and that's notably the energy efficiency, where, for instance, at issue would be processes such as ride sharing as opposed to individual car ownership. Obviously, the smart grip technology in terms of like actual devices as well that will help us save on energy, and the innovation with regard to renewables itself. So Mechthild gave us an overview of the basic decisions that have been taken already. So that's obviously the EU Green Deal, that's the Fit for 55 package, and she just described the recent decision on the end of the internal combustion engine that was decided on by the co-legislators in the EU context. So that's obviously a great step forward already, and very telling for our future prospect, I think. There have been any number of other decisions already, most of which we've already touched on, but I hope to be able to introduce some new elements at least as well, which is by pointing to what President von der Leyen said, notably in her State of the Union speech last month. Sorry, 2 months ago by now. So that's beyond the dependency on fossil fuels, which again, we've discussed already quite a bit here, that we anticipate that beyond fossil fuels by 2030, demand for rare earths in the EU will increase 5-fold. So that obviously will be a next challenge and one to overcome, and for us to avoid running into the next dependency, essentially. And that most likely won't possibly be Russia, but I mean, there's many contenders, I'm afraid. So a couple of initiatives that the Commission is taking to tackle precisely that long term then, of course, is the new partnerships, some of which have been discussed already, and the President mentioned in her speech a couple of trade agreements in particular, but also ongoing discussions with India, and in particular, of course, friendshoring, as the word goes, partnerships with like-minded countries. She also, however, mentioned a couple of initiatives that we are going to take unilaterally, if you like. So the Battery Alliance is already ongoing in the EU, and the President last year announced the CHIPS Act already. So now we're going to move on to a European Critical Raw Materials Act as well. The IPCES were already referred to as well. So that acronym, to decode that for everybody, is Important Projects of Common European Interests. Both major ones, let's say, Austria is participating in, and I'll come to that in a little bit. And very interestingly as well, the President announced a new European Sovereignty Fund on the horizon to shape industrial policy as we go forward. I'll talk a little bit about the resilience plans and Repower EU still, and then leave it at that. With regard to the RRPs, that's the recovery and resilience plans that were, of course, initially come up with, let's say, in response to the COVID crisis and the economic and social consequences that had, but which is now going to be expanded through Repower EU. Those were aimed at the twin transitions of green and digitalization already. So that was, to an extent, avant la lettre, and obviously very helpful in this context. And they're now going to be expanded even further for Repower EU, as per the discussion already, obviously mostly with expanding on renewables. But I noted with interest the Mechthild's announcement just now that just next week we'll actually be able to look forward to a proposal on permitting in particular, which is a discussion that we've had widely in Europe, and particularly in the Austrian context as well. I'll just give a few examples on the Austrian plan. That's the Recovery and Resilience Plan that addresses our future concerns already. That is, for instance, pushing mobility through establishing and electrifying train tracks. That's e-vehicles as well. That's isolating homes and replacing renewable heating systems. That's also supporting business. And that comes back to the point of where exactly it is that innovation can help us, innovation on business, that is. So that is going to be extended. And one last quote from the President that I'll leave you with is that Repower is not only about energy, but is actually about global competitiveness. So that's a theme that will obviously ring a bell here in particular as well, but it's also about sovereignty. And that, I think, is the uncomfortable truth, once again, that we very much have to face, certainly after Russia's vicious attack. And that is that geopolitics is here to stay. That's not comfortable for business, nor for anyone, of course, but that is what we'll have to deal with going forward. Thank you.
Tim, that's a very good point there on the simple, brute reality that we have to deal with something which we really didn't want to have to deal with, but it exists. The other point I will come back to on is some of the issues to do with decoupling and supply chains, which I think flow into the energy issues. But enough on that for now. But okay, can I move over to Stefan and your initial observations?
Yeah, so dear Mr. Selmayr, dear Mr. Oettinger, dear Mr. Harrer, also dear honored guest, it's a pleasure for me to be on the panel. Maybe let me start with a very short or brief analysis of the current situation, but then focus on the solutions. So let me start with a short pause. When we look at our European economic system, it's based on energy. Without energy, there is no economic development, there is no welfare. So energy is the key. Yeah? So those regions in the world that provide cheap, reliable, and sustainable energy will be the winners. First observation. Second observation, and I think it was taken from the first panel also. Where is Europe positioned at the moment? We have a climate crisis. Europe facing it dramatically already. We have seen 600,000 hectares burning in Europe. We have rivers drying out. We have lakes drying out. So climate crisis has already an impact, which we didn't discuss in the first panel. But in the second issue is we have an energy crisis in Europe. Yeah, prices are dropping, but the competition is around the world. So power prices are 3 times higher than in the US or in Asia. Gas prices are 4 to 5 times, how you compare it, higher than in the US or in Asia. So this is the current situation. So, but why are we in this situation? This is also the question. Very simple, because we based our economic system on fossil fuels. Why? Because they were cheap and they were reliable. And now I make a very hard comparison, just to apologize for that. But if you're dependent, it's like a truck. Yeah, fossil fuels are like a truck. So if the truck dealer sees you're locked in, what is going to do? He's increasing the prices and he's playing with uncertainty. That is, maybe do not deliver it. So it's like a similar situation we are having at the moment. Yeah. They are raising the prices, they're playing with uncertainty, they play with the fear of our households, of our industry, that they cannot afford the bill, that they do not get the energy. But the second problem with the fossil fuels are, every time we consume them, we put CO2 emissions in the atmosphere, we heat up our Earth, we destroy our living spaces for the next generation. So actually we are locked in at the moment. But, and now, stop this negative scenario, but this analysis is always important to move forward. There is a clear way out. And I put it really in 2 numbers. It's 100% renewables and 0 emissions. So now we can discuss, can Europe do it? Yes. We have the natural energy resources. We have hydro. We have wind. We have sun. And what we also have, we have the technologies already to use these natural energy resources to make with them energy. Yes, it was a discussion already here, also in the panel before. We have to be very careful that we're not running the next dependency, as we do not at the moment have the industries in Europe, but we have them in Asia. And you know, and I can tell you one short story. I was negotiating with the Chinese to deliver us the PV panels. So I think there's no difference if you're negotiating with a Russian company, because they definitely know what they can sell, to which price they can sell you. What is happening if China at the moment says, stop, we're not delivering any panels to Europe? We have at the moment 80% dependency on Chinese panels, 80%. And now the positive thing is, 10 years ago in Germany, we had 90% of the photovoltaic production in Europe. It was 10 years ago. So it's possible that we rebuild up these industries like photovoltaic industry, we can build up a storage industry, we can build up a wind industry, but we have to do it now. And before yesterday, I did a rough calculation. Currently, we are sending bills to other countries outside of Europe. We are importing at the moment 50–70% of our energy is imported. This costs us with the current energy prices 1.2 trillion euros every year if the prices stay at this level. So if we transform the total system, and I can give you the numbers afterwards, I do not want to borrow you at this time, if we increase PV, if we increase wind, if we increase storage, if we increase hydrogen, we have to invest 7 trillion euros. So calculation is easy. 6 years, it's done with these costs. So it's possible, yeah, and it's clear also to change the perspective. This is a shift of our economy. We have to rebuild the total economic system. We have to do this, and we can do this now because Europe has the possibilities. So, and this is now, yeah, a lot talking, and now I want to come to acting, yeah, because I'm 20 years now in the energy business, and it was talking about also the other generation. I have also kids, and when I started my position 2 years ago as a CEO of a regional energy utility, I said to my team, my managers, you know what, when my kids are older, they will ask me maybe one question: Father, what have you done actually during your time? Why didn't you change that? You were all talking. So, and that's why I said to my team, we will show for one region. It's a small region, Burgenland. Yeah, it's a region in Austria. I'm the CEO of the energy utility there, and we set a very clear goal: 2030, 100% renewables, zero emission. So now you can say, yeah, maybe as we heard, we already have a lot of wind production. I can lay down and say it's done. No, it's not done, because we are importing 50% of our energy. And we also have to change the perspective. It's not all electricity. We have to think of energy. Yeah. So if we address a goal, it's the energy goal. So we have to increase 50% of our production in Burgenland with renewables. So, and we have to reduce the emissions from 2 million we have at the moment per year to 0. How are we doing that? First, very clear goal. Also, together with the government in Burgenland, decided this goal. Second, a clear change in the company strategy. We are not anymore an energy utility. I said this is over. Selling electricity, selling gas, it's not a business case anymore. Our focusing, and you know, when I was saying that, when I started, everybody 2 years ago were looking at me and saying, you're totally done. Yeah. But I said to them, what we have to do is we have to provide our customers, households, industries, with solutions so that they can produce their energy on site. So, and this is what we are now implementing. We have 2 packages. One package is a household package, an at-home package we call it, and one package is a community package. The at-home package and the community package always have 4 clear measures. First, own electricity production with photovoltaic rooftop. Second, own heat production with heat pumps. Third, installing storage capacity to use also the electricity from day to night. And fourth, which was also mentioned, energy efficiency measures, providing them as packages. With these 4 measures, a single household can come with no hard calculation to 70% energy independency. 30% is still something which we will provide them over big wind farms and photovoltaic plants. Yeah? So, but it's clear not every household can afford an own rooftop panel or own storage. This is costly. Therefore, we also look at the communities and say, okay, if you live in a flat, if you do not have the possibility to invest there, then we are going in the community, we are building there a roof photovoltaic, we are building there a central storage, we are building there a central heat pump, and we're delivering you to a fixed price the energy, so that you know locally where your energy is produced, that you know what you have to pay, not only tomorrow, but also for the next 10 to 20 years. And thereby you save money and you save also the climate. So this is actually how we are moving forward. And to conclude that, we are in a good way. 2030 is next. And what I want to say is we have put one important issue on this dependency of the technologies. We could use lithium-ion batteries, which are available. We can buy them from Huawei, whatever. They will deliver us this. But what is a hidden champion? When we have the hidden champion already in Europe, we build up a cooperation with a German company that is building organic storage. So now you think organic storage, what's that? That's mystic. No, they are really have organic storage, and we will have them in December already in Burgenland. We hope it will work. Why? Because all materials are in Europe, and you can recycle them. So the solutions are there. The crisis is a big chance, and I think we have all that we can change it, and also now something, because we are here in the European Union, and we're talking about institutions, what they have to do. I think it's also all about us to do something. Regulation can come after as well, yeah. But if we companies always lay back and say they change the regulation, then we change our business model, it wouldn't work.
Okay, that's great. I have some questions, but I'll come back to this later. Right. Okay, Chris, your observations. Yeah. How do you solve these problems?
Well, so first of all, good evening, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I have to confess, I'm a regulator, and I'm, even worse, maybe I'm an engineer. So I focus my observations on the electricity market and the electricity system. And here we had quite different starting points in terms of beginning the energy system transition in the different countries of Europe. So you had countries with a lot of thermal power plants, coal-fired power plants, gas as well, of course, also related to district heating, so quite efficient way to take care of electricity and heat. You had countries with a long tradition on nuclear power plants. Well, not in Austria, of course, but in other regions of Europe, it's quite a base of the electricity generation. Then you had countries also, well, 100 years ago, that started with hydropower, so kind of old renewables before we came to the new renewables with wind and photovoltaics. And I think that in this divergency of the generation mix in the different member countries, we also have a strength of the European Union, because what we have in addition is a network. So you can link all these generation technologies, generation locations in the different regions of Europe, link it with a high voltage network, mainly high voltage, but of course a distribution network as well. But my point is that we not only need the generation, we also need the grid. So in fact, there are clear targets for the renewables in Europe, but we need to accompany this with clear targets for the energy saving as well, which is done. We need a higher efficiency in the electricity system, even considering that there might be more applications electrified in the future, so be it on the industrial side, be it with heat pumps, on the transportation and so on. And we also need the network development on all levels of the network, so to integrate the renewables from the low voltage to the highest voltage in Europe. And the market design, and we heard a lot in the last weeks and months about the future market design, long-term market design, needs to be fit for the expectation that we have on our electricity system conditions in 2030, in 2040. So we shouldn't, of course, we are now very much occupied by the crisis, but whatever we design now will need some implementation time, and will there be by 2030, 2040, as I just said. So we need to already think now what the conditions will be then, what we expect to be the market needs there, expect to be the generation possibilities, technologies that are available by then, and find the proper market design for that point in time. And well, it's kind of an implicit question if we still need gas. And unfortunately, I'm afraid we will need gas for quite a while for adequacy in several countries in Europe, but as well for taking care of the congestion of the network. So it's power plant, usually gas-fired plants for redispatch as well. But coming back to the renewables, they're a kind of, well, group of different animals, so to say, with quite specific behavior for each kind. So you have photovoltaics, very small ones on the rooftops, as you just mentioned, Stefan. But you have greenfield projects as well, huge greenfield projects, photovoltaics. You couldn't imagine that a few years ago. You have solar thermal in parts of Europe, these mirror systems followed by a thermal cycle. But you have as well wind turbines in different sizes. So usually we all know these several megawatt windmills, but you have the smallest as well that could be put on a rooftop. You have hydro run-of-river plants, big ones like here in Vienna on the Danube, but you have micro hydro as well for decades. I said at the beginning 100 years of more or less of hydropower in Europe. You have biomass, you have ocean technology. So, and there are not only differences between these categories, but there are also differences within a category in terms of size. So also the grid connection level, the network that is needed to integrate it into the electricity system. Also the auxiliary services in terms of providing flexibility to the system, to the consumers, providing balancing support, even black start capabilities if we talk about other kinds of crises. And the quality of the forecasts, how much electricity can be generated from a specific source, also varies over these different types of renewables. So it's a bit better for hydropower. It's, of course, weather dependent, climate dependent, and weather dependent for some others with wind and solar. So what we need to do is to select the best features of all these renewable technologies to combine it smartly. And then the question is, shouldn't there be a rush for renewables now? I think there is indeed. But unfortunately, there are still some barriers. Some are on the way to be overcome. But still we see the availability of materials, availability of components, and also the availability of experts. So you need people to do the planning, to do the manufacturing, to do the implementation. And yeah, so this is what we see on all fronts, that we need the experts. And a second big point, also mentioned already, is the permitting and authorization. And I think we should make use of this kind of window of opportunity where we have this, I would call it a social license, that yes, invest in renewables, deploy renewables all around Europe, and need to get the procedures a bit accelerated. We need grid connection, we need to tackle congestion, I mentioned that already. And there are two more points. So usually there's a mood that electricity is there anyway, because it was in the last years, in the last decades, electricity was there always. Now it's an issue with the prices. It's also a slight issue with adequacy, so it's a bit, might look a bit tense for the first time in several decades. So I think that also here is a move to more awareness on what is needed to have secure and cheap or affordable electricity in our European system. And the last point is that the implementation in these different areas is intertwined. So you always need the technologies, you need the market, you need the institutional framework, you need the legal framework. And in fact, we need to optimize that all together, which is quite often a challenge. I'm sure we can solve it, but it will not be easy. And this brings me back to that, yes, we might need to change the market design, but we should focus on where we will reach in 2030, in 2040, and put all our effort to be ready by then and have a perfect system, as we did in several other occasions in Europe.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is quite interesting, because what you're going to take you to then is the question of the financing all of this investment. So you've got to have the market design and the financial structures in place to then be able to roll all of this out, as well as all the supply chain and everything else issues. Okay, supply chains, I suppose, also takes you sort of in the general direction of nuclear power. So, Valerie, your observations, perhaps from a nuclear
My observations. So I have 3 points to make. The first one, I'd like to remind ourselves that we actually have to exit fossil fuels by 2050. And it's a long-term goal, so we should align our short-term goals to be, of course, to manage the current crisis, but also to exit fossil fuels by 2050 for 2 reasons. We talked a lot about energy independence. I give you 2 numbers for my country, France. You can hear from my accent. Our bill in 2022 for oil and gas will be 100 billion euros, up from 40 billion euros 2 years before. And just to give you an order of magnitude, because I know the question will come, our imports of uranium are less than 1 billion, so 100 times less. And this is all the more of a challenge because we forget about it, especially in my country, because we spend our time discussing nuclear versus renewables. But our share of fossil fuels in our energy consumption in Europe at 70%, 60% in France. But it's huge to get out of fossil in 30 years. The second reason, of course, and you've talked about it, is our climate goals. And to reach our climate goals, we'll need a lot of low-carbon electricity, a lot. It will not be the only solution, but it should be about 50% of our energy consumption in 2050, so it's half of the solution. And to give you an example, again, I'll take a French example, but the national plan is to diminish our energy consumption by 40%. But to do that, we need to increase our electricity consumption by 35%. So we'll actually need to increase low-carbon electricity production in the coming years. Of course, there are different scenarios of consumption, but I know you know that. So this is my first point, just to remind this ourselves. So, and by the way, today we only have 2 countries in the EU that have decarbonized electricity production, which is Sweden and France, with a mix of nuclear and renewable. So, we know it can be done. Okay, so let me move to my second point, is that I will argue that 100% renewable strategy is actually very risky for several reasons. So the first one is that it's very challenging to deploy the amount of renewables we will need to reach our goals. So we talked about permitting. Right now it's complex, not only project management, but permitting. We have currently 2 laws in Parliament in France, one on accelerating permitting for renewables and one for accelerating permitting for nuclear. They're both together in Parliament right now. And actually, it's harder to find a majority for accelerating permitting of renewables because we start to have a lot of resistance on permitting for wind, even for offshore wind. So this is a first challenge. The second challenge is the availability of storage technology at the scale we need. There's no country that has today deployed storage at the scale we need to deploy storage. So there's a big uncertainty, and it's actually a bet. And if we lose this bet, if we lose these 2 bets, we will have the only solution will be to go back to gas plants. Then there are the risk of new dependencies, and there are 2. So first one, we talked about it, is raw materials. 100% renewable strategy is very costly in terms of raw material. Just to give you an example, an excellent IEA report from 2021 with the SDS scenario, multiplying by 4 the amount of critical materials by 2040. Okay, and part of it is due to the electrical vehicle, and part of it is due to, of course, electricity production. And nuclear is quite good for material usage. And another dependency is imports from H2, import from renewable hydrogen. Right now, the current European plan is really focused on renewable hydrogen and versus low carbon hydrogen, which includes gas and CCS, but also includes nuclear hydrogen. And so the plan is to rely by 2030 of 10 million tons of local production and 10 million tons of imports. So that means we are creating a new dependency on renewable hydrogen imports. With a situation which is very complex, we're very late. We already have a plan in the US in the Inflation Act, a very simple plan. You know, you get tax credits for the lower carbon content you have in your hydrogen, the more money you get. And they don't care how it's produced. The only thing they care about is the amount of CO2 in the life cycle analysis. We have 10 texts, very complex, late, right? Which several of them exclude hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen. So we're putting ourselves at risk of dependencies from which countries? Countries, we talk a lot about Namibia. You know that the whole population in Namibia doesn't have access to electricity, so we're going to take their electricity, though first they need it for their people, or countries that have a very high share of fossil fuels in their electricity production. The third point, not going to be surprised, is that I believe nuclear is part of a solution. So nuclear is low carbon, so 12 grams versus, this is the IPCC number, versus 1,000 grams for coal and about 500 grams for gas. And 4 grams in France, because we actually enrich uranium with low carbon electricity. So it's very low carbon, and it's dispatchable. And what we see in the latest studies is that the value of dispatchable technologies is very, very high in electricity systems with a lot of renewables. So if I give you, I know I'm going to give a mic, but I give you the study that's currently based for the French strategy. It's a study that has taken 2 years to do. And they, of course, look at LCOE for every amount of energy, but what they're looking at is the total system cost with different mix of renewables and nuclear, some scenarios with no nuclear, and scenarios with, it's 2050 scenarios, and shares of nuclear going from 30%, 40%, 50% max. And what you're looking at is the scenarios with 40% nuclear, if I take this one, is 10 billion euros less per year than the scenarios which is 100% renewables, the best one, because of the value of nuclear as a dispatchable technology in the electricity system. Actually, there's not a lot of difference on the cost of the technologies by themselves, but what the difference comes from is the cost of flexibility and the cost of the investment needed in the network, so the integration cost, systems cost, right? So this is actually really good. So, of course, I'm going to have a question, so I'll answer it. How do you value, the cost of nuclear has increased? Yes, but we believe, and we have proofs of that if you do nuclear as part of an industrial program, then you can control nuclear costs and have quite good costs. The French program, it's targeted at 60 euros per megawatt hour. And we see that in China. In China, they build nuclear, they take 5 years to build a nuclear plant because they have an ongoing industrial program. They now have a capacity to build 10 plants per year, which we nearly did in France in the 70s because we did up to 8 new reactors per year. So that's what I wanted to tell you.
That's fine. Thank you. That's also very comprehensive. I've got several. That's also, thank you. That's very comprehensive. I will come back on several points. But now I want to go over to Andre as last but not least.
Thank you so much. I'll try to stay as short as possible. A lot of interesting things were said today about how Europe can actually move to a carbon-free energy generation. And a lot of things were discussed and mentioned about Russian gas and how we all got to the point where we are now. However, my observation, and I'm Ukrainian, I used to run Naftogaz. We started diversification from Russia in 2014, and we ended up not buying any gas from Russia. We are still buying all gas from Europe. And we did go through some pretty challenging reforms, also with the help of Mr. Oettinger at the very beginning of that path, when we had in trilateral negotiations with Gazprom. So now looking at discussion here, I have very similar impression I had in 2014 when we were discussing situation around Europe, around Ukraine, our place in Europe, and how our place is affected by Gazprom position. And I believe discussion here, to some extent, lacks pragmatism. There were mentioned such concepts of sovereignty, comparative competition, or competitive advantage, but pragmatism, to my surprise, was not mentioned. Why? I will give you a couple of examples. Several speakers referred to Gazprom as a reliable gas producer until February, or supplier, February of this year. I would like to remind you about the gas price hike last year, before the full-fledged war started. It was happening long time before, and with all due respect, I believe some people in Europe made it or chose a convenient position not to notice the reason that this reliable so-called supplier, who has become not only dominant, but the only balancing supplier for Europe, played a bit dirty game to maximize their profits and to teach a couple of people in Europe of a lesson which was missed. And then all of a sudden, Russians thought, well, if this lesson went unnoticed, we got our money, and there is no punishment, well, let's try again. Why not? I mean, if there is no downside, go ahead. That's classical Russian tactics. And I've been negotiating with them since 2006, so I know them quite well. Now, going back to pragmatism. Now, let's set aside the mistake of the past. Now we have a very clear situation, which is obvious, at least for us, that Russian gas probably will leave Europe. And that's a reality. That reality creates a unique momentum for the market to achieve the green transition and the Green Deal, which has been discussed so much before. And why I'm referring to pragmatism is that, again, we are talking about things which are so nice to be heard by average consumers, and they are mostly coming from the angle of renewables, of buyer. But if you look at the statistics of CO2 emission, and if you look at the pace of growth of these technologies, you will easily understand that the target of CO2 reduction, which we have in front of us, will not be met. And this is where I will vouch for the position of the speaker before me, that we should get pragmatic and realistic and not forget about such thing as nuclear. Yes, some people may not like it, some people may fear of it, but if we would be choosing between permanent CO2 emission, which is definitely killing us as a humankind, and the risk of nuclear, which may or may not, and rather may not, so far statistics is much more in favor of nuclear, forgetting about this segment and about this source of energy, in my view, is a big mistake. Because the amazing position that Russian gas was enjoying is that while people were discussing were discussing renewables, but nuclear was set aside, all of a sudden we saw a huge increase of gas supply to Europe. So gas, at the end of the day, benefited from this procrastination. And my point here is that being pragmatic and looking at EROI, this concept, energy return investment, which is so much important, we can easily come back to pragmatic approach of what source of energy can help us, on one hand, achieve the Green Deal, but on the other hand, also being pragmatic in competitive advantage. Because if China is building many reactors every year, and Europe will not be competitive in energy production, then the whole economy will not be competitive. So to some extent, position of other countries leaves Europe no choice. And in my view, this choice is pretty obvious. And I hope very much that 5 years from now, we'll be discussing how many reactors Europe is building. In my view, that choice is inevitable. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think what I might do is give, as we've only got about 15 minutes left, is simply open it to the floor, and then we can see where we go from there. So would anybody, having all that gamut of different questions and observations, would anyone like to ask the first question? Lady over there. Okay, name and affiliation, please.
Hi, my name is Michaela Moore. I'm an attorney here, but also a concerned citizen with what's been going on. I get your point about the nuclear energy. The issue is, and this is the issue that Ukraine has now during the war, is that if it's attacked, there's no energy in a sense, because what Russia did is that they attacked all of the lines, and the lines go down. They have to have backup generators to keep the reactors running. So if we talk about this situation and energy security, which is also an issue because of the attacks on the Nord Stream lines, how do we combine all of that together in terms of increasing our renewables as well as the nuclear, and how do we keep our energy source safe? Because it may actually be a question one of these days.
Actually, thank you for the question, and I think it's very up to the point which I decided not to make, but I will make it now. The full-fledged war in Ukraine has actually proven how resilient nuclear energy is compared to other sources. If you look at several power plants which have been under permanent attack, they are still up and running, and they are safe, and they will be safe. If you look at Nord Stream 2, on the contrary, it's a very different situation. So statistically speaking, so far nuclear energy is winning big time compared to methane for sure. And that, in my view, is a very important pragmatic takeaway, which needs to be taken further and applied in strategic thinking in Europe, that nuclear can be very safe, especially with new nuclear like SMRs. And that safety, yes, has historical problems like Chernobyl we have in Ukraine. So I know what I'm talking about. But now, in the new age, there is a way to make nuclear very safe. And so far, my observation is that many politicians are staying away from that discussion, mostly for emotional reasons. If you start talking numbers, all of a sudden, in numbers, nuclear wins.
Okay, Valerie, do you want to?
Yes. Today we have 13 countries in Europe that have plans for to use nuclear in the future. So once Ukraine will join us, we'll have 14 countries in Europe that want to use nuclear. And I actually may disagree with what's been said before. I think we should have a European strategy on nuclear, because we have half of our countries that want to use nuclear. We need to have competitive nuclear in Europe, because we are going to have to compete with Russian nuclear, well, not right now, but at least Chinese nuclear, Korean nuclear, America. In America, we have 50 startups, nuclear startups on Generation 4, on fusion, and they have support. To give you an example, in France, we receive no money from the European Union for support the R&D on new reactors. But we are investing 500 million on these new reactors to support 10 startups from now until 2030. And in the US, they support right now, out of the 50 startups, they support 10 startups with 1.5 billion per year. So China, they have, mock-ups on every new technology, molten salt and so forth, right? So we are at risk of losing our ability, our R&D and industrial ability on a key technology we will need to have a future. So we need to have a European strategy on nuclear, even if half of our countries don't want to use it, but half of our countries want to use it.
Yeah, you should. To add something, now reflecting the conversation, I think we are not in the situation to play out one technology against the other one and say nuclear is more beautiful than wind and solar and so on. I think what has to be clear is the goal where we want to move forward. The goal has to be at the end less dependent. My perspective as Austrian and is more renewables, 100% renewables, that's why I said it. But on the way towards to this end situation, we'll need the current energy system. We are not in the situation to now stop different technologies because then we put us in the next crisis. So it's a transformation, and I think we should use the crisis now to go towards the goal, which we, I think, all have common in this room.
Yeah, as a pragmatic approach to whatever works in whatever direction, we should take us all in the same direction. That's okay. Yeah. Right. Any more questions from the audience? It's getting late and the buffet is awaiting, but do we have another question or two? If not, I will go around the panel and talk. I mean, one of the questions, Stefan, I was going to ask you was about the difficulty I see with renewables is I can see what you're doing, and it's very effective as it is with the approach you're taking, but on a kind of national or European scale, is that part of the difficulty that, you know, if you look at the stats for Germany, I think it's something like the capacity utilization factor, you know, the actual amount of capacity used in any year for wind is 20%, and I think for solar it's 10%. And I sometimes wonder with renewables, the problem is a bit like the steam engine. If you go into the Science Museum in London, there is an original 1814 steam engine. Now, you may say to yourself, well, it was 1814. Why didn't we have the railway revolution around 1814, 1815, after the Napoleonic Wars? And in fact, if you look, you find that there were steam engines running around 1804. Sort of moving stuff around. But they couldn't work because the enabling technology didn't exist. And the enabling technology was the metal technology, which would be sufficiently robust so you could run rails on the train, so the trains could function. So the steam engine of the 1814 period could do about 3 or 4 kilometers from the pit head to the port to deliver the coal on rails which had to be regularly replaced. Otherwise, it just couldn't go that far. And I wonder, in many ways, what we're talking about on large scale is a similar sort of thing, that the enabling technology, which is large-scale battery, which means you can use, you're so much more flexible use of renewables, you can store the energy and develop it. The enabling technology does not yet exist on the scale that we need. I mean, I know we do have batteries, but I mean, on the super scale you'd need for the systems regulator, for e-control, be able to know that there is, you know, sort of a gigawatt or 2 of power ready to go where, as and when required. That doesn't exist. And I wonder if that part of our trouble is not to say we shouldn't do it. Clearly we should do it. But is there an enabling technology issue, rather like those rails which didn't exist until the late 1820s?
Actually, when I started in the energy business, it was really the Nobel Prize question always, is a system working with 100% renewables? I think, and we can go into numbers, it can work. Yeah, and I tell you shortly why, and also on this day. We are #1 wind producer, and at the moment in Austria we have almost no wind. I was adopting and looking now at Europe, and this is now the strength of Europe. We have a lot of wind in Germany at the moment, but we have no wind in Austria. Second, so regional diversity of renewables keeps us reliable renewables. Second, when I started, and I said, okay, why we do not have photovoltaic installed in Burgenland? We are the region with the most sun radiation in Austria. The reason was, okay, grid. We have almost no grid access. So then we did an analysis, and we have seen when there is a lot of wind, there's less sun. It's relative. And so what we have done, we have used the same grid access and injected there now ground-mounted big solar photovoltaic plants. So we increased now from 3,000 hours wind onshore production to more than 4,000 hours, which is currently a run-of-river-based power plant. So on a local level, on a regional level, there is diversity, and they work together. And this is now where the European Union comes in, and where the connection of the European energy system will play a critical role. And second, storage are possible. And now I take again the example of Burgenland. I was also thinking we need huge storage capacities. But if we play together now wind onshore with photovoltaic, we need 300 megawatt storage capacity for shifting 5 hours. Yeah, and we really did very deep analysis. So it's doable, and I do not say, we can do it in 1 month or 2 months, but now it's the time, the crisis is a chance for us to change it.
Sorry, yes, Christy.
Yeah, if I may add.
Yeah, sure.
So I think it's not only a question of storage, which is important, of course, but it's more general an issue of flexibility. And that could be on the demand side, that could be import or export on the European level, that could be simply a smart behavior in using electricity at the point in time where you use electricity. So I think it's broader, and of course a hybrid, so a clever combination of different renewable sources and plants is quite beneficial. And I think there's a lot of technology around. Sometimes it lacks a business case, and sometimes it also might lack a proper legal base, but it's mainly not on the technology side.
Thanks, that's very interesting.
May I add something? Yeah. I think, yes, there are lots of technologies, but they're not proven at scale. So I think the point is, what is the most robust strategy? We've seen that we were absolutely unable to predict the crisis that we currently live. So we cannot. We had not predicted the first oil shock in the 70s. We hadn't predicted the current strategy we're living, which is about the same scale. So we have to be really humble and take the most robust strategy. Of course, there will be new technologies, and they're really welcome because we have a huge challenge ahead of us. The fact is, the higher percentage of renewable in a network, the higher the cost of integration. So we should bet for a certain share to be defined of dispatchable technology on a European network to have a robust system.
Now, robust is important. I just like to come back to Tim on the supply chain issues, because one of the observations I picked up talking to American colleagues is about the determination of the White House to begin to decouple and reindustrialize onshore, it's a terrible phrase, onshoring industrial production. And one of the points which I think is overlooked in Brussels and a lot of EU capitals is the extent to which the Americans aren't really that bothered about how much is directly transferred to the US. As long as it's in the hands of allies, they're okay. That's the issue, really. It's to, and this is not also about completely as a kind of evil strategy to undermine the Chinese. The argument is we need sufficient to be moved, which is strategic to the security of the West. So, and then a lot of that then plays into a lot of the energy issues as well in terms of energy supply chains. But the question that then flows from it is the extent to which this involves a degree of industrial policy and industrial strategy and financing of that at both member state and a national level. And you mentioned a number of different things the Commission are doing, which is moving in that direction. But it seems to me it is incredibly major departure from the way we have been seeking to operate over the last 2 decades. And it really requires a real mindset. And I don't know, how far do you think we're along that path? And how difficult do you think it's going to be to get there? And are we going to end up endlessly playing catch up with the Americans?
Okay, so it's a crystal ball question then.
Yeah.
There's a number of those. If I may make a brief comment just on the discussion that we just had so far, I'm very happy that I turned out to be right, that this was an excellent panel, and that all the diverse inputs were super practical, some of them obviously sort of thing, but also really, I mean, insightful and inspiring. Just like to pick up on 2 things, and that's, for one thing, I take the point also included in your question, basically, that there's a bit of a bet in there somewhere. I think that's a point Valerie was making sort of thing, and I think that's you can expand on that. That's true for all of our future in a sense. There's going to be a bit of bets that we're going to have to make, but we do have help by incentives, basically. I mean, we are in the business of making good policy, hopefully, so that's a help, obviously, but incentives work, basically. And there's a reason that I also addressed business up to a point in my initial statement, and that's obviously what works with business in particular, sort of thing, price signals, incentives, basically, right? Second point I was going to pick up on, I just forgot, but I'll just return to your question, basically. And that's the crystal ball question. How far along are we on really genuine European sovereignty in the words of Madam President, but also an article that I wrote earlier this year for WKO, the Außenhandel edition. That's what we're in the process, unfortunately being the compelling event, obviously, but unfortunately in the business of defining, strengthening our sovereignty, realizing that international relations do involve reciprocity. That's a conclusion that Chancellor Scholz of Germany has recently also developed a little bit just ahead of his trip to China, which is the recognition, again, unfortunate to business as for every other actor, but that there's reciprocity involved in international relations. If that reciprocity is not forthcoming, then something has to be done about it, unfortunately. And that's the background against which, of course, Europe is going to have to come together. Now, I mean, this other dictum of, never waste a good crisis is, I suppose, also unused, overused rather in the recent kind of context, shall we say. But that, unfortunately, does, I think, turn out to be true in the European context. I mean, if there is another crisis of the geopolitical sort, let's say, then I think that will help matters, if you like. And that also applies to the development of the current crisis, of course, right? I mean, let's see where we end up. I hope that we're not very far off. Let me put it this way.
That's great. Thank you. Well, I think we may, unless there is another question in the audience, and I see no audience hands being raised. Okay, at that point, I shall say thank you very much. Can we applaud the panel in the usual way? Thank you very much. And I think we have a buffet outside. Right, thank you very much, and good evening.